everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show, and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. How are you all doing? Midterms are next week. Seems like things are getting a little anxiously chaotic. That feels like what's in the air. I don't know if that's what's actually in the air most places. And by the air, I just mean from looking at Twitter every once in a while. So I don't know if that's what people are feeling on the streets. I think if you sit inside a lot and write like I do, and then you look at Twitter or Instagram to get your information about how the world is or what's going on in the world, I think that skews it just a little bit, but I don't know. I would say some of the people with guns that are watching different polls, I would say that's a little worrying, but I don't know. Not much I can do about those people. But you know what I can do? Keep putting out great episodes week after week to try to take your mind off of that. And today's episode is no different. Today I am talking to Bill Orcutt. If you don't know who Bill is, why don't I read you his bio right now? Originally from Miami, Florida, musician Bill Orcutt made films and played music in various groups before co-founding the noise rock group Harry Pussy in the early 90s with I said it, and it doesn't feel kind of a prude. If this is your first time listening to the show, I'm a little bit of a prude on... Anyway, with his then wife, Adris Hoyos, after releasing a number of albums and EPs on labels like Silpries, the group broke up and Bill moved to San Francisco to focus on filmmaking and other endeavors. In 2009, he began making music publicly again. I wrote publicly in there because I'm like, well, what if he was making music on his own and just wasn't releasing it? I don't know. I just wanted to hedge my bets. And in the last 13 years has produced a number of incredible experimental albums. His latest, Music for Four Guitars, was just released back in September, and it is wonderful. I was first introduced to Bill now from his Live in LA album, which is one of my top things from the last couple years. And I liked, I'm going to call it HP. I know it's Harry Potter, but... God, you would think that I was not a middle-aged adult, and the fact that I can't just say that the name of this old band. But I was introduced to them back in college, but I think they had already broken up by the time I found them. So I really couldn't follow Bill's work until he reappeared, making these incredible kind of, I guess, experimental. I'm really bad with... You can see, listeners, that today I'm feeling very wishy-washy with my word choices. Because I was like imagining, like, well, what if Bill does listen back to this and he is like, hey, I was making music during, the years between 1997 and 2009. I just wasn't releasing it, and he gets mad at. By the way, absolutely lovely person to talk to. I don't know why he would get mad at the fact that I didn't have the word publicly in there. I'll be honest, my mental health. I got COVID. In fact, we recorded this episode like right after I recovered and was testing negative reliably. But since recovering, I have been very anxious and kind of agoraphobic and just generally, talked about it in therapy this week, but generally, I'm going to have to do some exposure therapy. That is, go inside places with a mask, obviously, but go inside places and be in there and just force myself to live through the anxiety until I get used to it. And also, going to have a consult with a psychiatrist, maybe get a low dose of Ativan or Abilify or Lexapro. I don't really know what the different ones do, but so that's my mental health journey. Anyway, enough of that. Bill was lovely to talk to. I hope you like this episode. And if you do and you want to check out other episodes of Beginnings, you can do that wherever you get your podcast from. I've been doing the show for 12 years. What I like to do here in the beginning is a little recommended if you like. Bill is a musician, let's say an experimental musician. I'll just throw that very broad genre out there. Well, what about other musicians that probably fall under that umbrella that I have talked to? You might like those episodes, like Wendy Eisenberg, who did a live performance of Music for Four Guitars with Bill, or Tara Jane O'Neill, Robin Holcomb, Nels Cline, Daniel Wyke, David Thomas of Pure Ubu. Those are all somewhat recent episodes, so check those out. If you like what you hear, subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Andy Beckerman. Twitter's circling the drain, so the moment on there I'm just posting character actors I recognize as I rewatch Night Court. And then Instagram for pet pics and Naomi and some other things. I got some amazing episodes coming up, including Homeboy Sandman, the wonderful writer Jerry Stahl, Kurt Wagner from Lamb Chop. I almost said Kurt Wagner because I am so used to that's Nightcrawler's name from the X-Men. I'm so used to saying that in my head. But that was a great talk, so stay tuned for those. But for now, let's talk to Bill. I tried to find information about you. I could find one bit is that you are from Miami.
I am.
And that's it. So you grew up there like you were a teenager in the 70s, right?
Yes. I grew up in Miami and I lived there till I was 35. So I didn't leave there until 1997, 96, 97. Yeah.
Is it a good place to grow up? I know nothing about it except for like Dexter was set there and there was like a drug money fueled real estate boom in the 80s. And that's all I really know about Miami.
Oh, I have nothing to compare it to really. It's the only place I ever grew up. So I don't know what it was like to grow up in other places. I mean, it worked out for me. My siblings grew up there. My parents grew up there. And, I left, but I have no bad feelings. And I go back like every year to see my family. So
how did they end up you said they grew up there. Were your grandparents from Florida?
No, my grandparents came from other places. My grandmother on my dad's side was Canadian and grew up in Havana and then like came over when she was like 10 or 20s to Miami. My grandfather on my dad's side was from upstate New York, like a lot of Orcutts are apparently. And then on my mom's side, I don't know where, I think they both came from the South. Like, I think like my mom's mom came from Georgia and I'm not sure where her dad came from, but probably somewhere in the South.
When you say came over from Havana, was that, I don't know what the timeline is exactly, but was that around the Cuban Revolution or was it?
No, that would have been well before the Cuban Revolution. So it's a long story. Her family is really kind of weird. She was named after Lucretia Borgia.
Okay.
But her dad they lived in Toronto, and then for some reason her mom died and her dad moved the whole family to Havana, and it's like when she was 3, and so my grandmother grew up in Havana.
Interesting. Yeah. Did any of that culture filter into your upbringing, or was it all just like standard, what I'm going to call standard Miami, and then we can talk about whatever that means?
Right. Oh, no. I mean, from her, no. There was no trace that I ever detected that she'd grown up in Cuba. But, standard Miami is, like more than 50% immigrant. So you have lots and lots of people who, the majority of the city doesn't speak English as as a first language. So
if there was like, this is not necessarily like a word, but like a phrase, so how would you describe like the atmosphere of growing up in Miami? Like what was Miami in the 70s to you?
I think, I wasn't really looking at a citywide level. I mean, I was like thinking about like my own personal problems of, feeling shy and, inadequate. And I wasn't really like trying to, I didn't map my personal problems out to the city. It was just my stuff. I mean, in terms of like who I knew, most people were either like Cuban or Jewish. So those are the two like cultural things that were I most connected with. Um, and that was, you know, that was it. I mean, in like it was a huge thing. There's if you've seen Scarface, um, you've never seen the Al Pacino Scarface.
I know
Uh,
enough about it to like get references, but beyond that, I'm not sure. Like,
right. So his character comes from Cuba in the Mariel boat lift. And so, like, I'm just giving you an example of how strong Cuban culture was in Miami. But that was like a riot at my high school when the Mariel boat lift happened, and they had to shut down school for the day because Castro had said anyone who wants to leave Cuba now can leave, and so every boat that was available in Miami headed across the straits to try and pick up relatives and stuff in Cuba. But that was like a huge event in
okay,
my childhood.
okay. So like, it's the equivalent of like when friends of mine who grew up in New York, they got off for Jewish holidays.
Uh huh.
There was a Cuban cultural event going on, and so your school shut down for that.
Yeah, I mean it was like an emergency event. It wasn't on the calendar.
Sure, it wasn't Yom Kippur, but it was like
Kids, it shut down because all the kids came running out of the school, like chanting. Uh, but yeah, I mean, it was a lot of political exiles in the city, like not just Cuban, but also like Haitian. So there were a lot of bombings going on, like car bombs and stuff, because
sorry.
people,
You said there were car bombs when you were a kid. There were car bombs going off in Miami.
yeah, because there would be political, factions, and that they were all exiles, but they were exiles for different reasons, or and and yeah, so there were like there were political kind of like I guess you would call them terrorist groups among the various exile communities, and there's violence.
And were you scared of this stuff? Like that would have like thanks to COVID, I basically stayed inside for 2.5 years. And then the minute I ventured out and did one thing that everyone else had been doing, I caught COVID. So like I was somewhat justified. And I have to imagine if there was something like domestic terrorism going on, I would have been a shut-in.
No, I mean, not so much. I mean, it's kind of like something you read about in the newspaper. I remember more like I think that like crime was kind of bad in the 80s, and they had to change like the license plate on rental cars because used to be a kind of identifier that would let you know that a car was a rental car, and those cars were getting hijacked at such a high rate, like people just running them off the road to hijack their car. Like even if you were driving on the highway, you weren't safe. They actually had to change the license plate to make them more anonymous. But yeah.
But you're not. So I guess what I'm trying to figure out is like, this is not filtering into your daily life. This is just more of the like background of where you're living, but it doesn't affect you emotionally, or does it?
No, I don't think so. Like I said, I mean, you're asking about quite general questions about Miami, and I'm kind of, trying to touch on some of the salient features that I remember reading about as a kid. But like I said, mostly as a kid, I'm dealing with the kind of stuff that most teenagers are dealing with, which is, just feeling miserable for less dramatic reasons.
Yeah. I mean, what was the neighborhood you grew up in?
Well, we moved a bit around in the city, so like I lived on North Miami. I grew up in North Miami Beach, and then at some point we moved further, like inland, away from the ocean. And I don't know. I mean, it was just houses.
Do you think it suited your personality? Like, I live in Los Angeles now, and I'm totally out of sync with the vibe here. I hate the sun. I don't like the beach. I want to just be indoors most of the time. If
Yeah.
you're not, if you haven't caught that about me yet.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I guess I that's a good question. I mean, I probably was not in sync because I didn't like the sun. I mean, you had kind of there was no options except to deal with it. But I wasn't somebody who really enjoyed being in a lot of bright sunlight, and that is what the city had to offer. So, yeah.
Yeah. What's the culture like? Because I also I don't really know much about the South. As a Jew, I've tried to stay above the Mason Dixon.
Hmm.
And so I only know whatever. I mean, my sister lives in Fort Lauderdale now. So I've been there once to visit
Right.
her, but I wasn't there enough to soak in whatever it felt like.
I mean, what's the culture like in Miami? Do you mean like cultural activities, or what is the how would I describe?
At least when you were growing up, I guess what I'm looking for is was it laid back? Was it because from being from Pennsylvania, being from the northeast, it's like a very anxious, very angry kind of vibe. Like living in Philadelphia when I lived there, you
Mm.
can kind of feel the ambient anger just walking
Uh,
around. Just everyone's got like a chip on their shoulder about something.
uh,
And here in Los Angeles, everything's like laid back and kind of lackadaisical and very just very placid, but like with an undercurrent of their anger is there. It's just like buried under a lot
uh,
of like passive aggressiveness.
right. I mean, it was a lot of. I mean, it was. It took me like so. One way to talk about it is like when I moved in '97 from Miami to San Francisco. It took me a while to adjust to how kind of what's the word, like kind of rational everybody was. Like driving was very different because like in Miami everybody's very aggressive and you have to constantly be battling for things and kind of like trying to cut people off because if you don't cut them off they'll cut you off, and my mom once told me that she never uses her blinkers because if she puts on her blinkers someone will come up to prevent her from getting over. So I so that I mean so that's like a difference, and people are really kind of aggressive there. And like my wife who moved with me, like she still hasn't quite adapted. Like she hasn't learned to like not be beeping at people on the street, which if they don't move fast enough. And I do that too as well. But like in San Francisco, like people are very, relaxed.
Mhm.
Nobody jaywalks, which is kind of unbelievable. Like there'll be no one on the street, but they'll just stand there and watch the emptiness.
Yeah.
But they won't move. They won't go across the street until the sign tells them they can cross.
Yeah. I had to get used to that here. No one does that either.
It's
Coming from,
crazy.
especially from New York, it's just like you walk wherever, whenever.
Exactly. Yeah, so I think Miami's more East Coast in that regard, and people are hopped up on like, strong coffee and stuff like that. And here it's just much more calm. I mean, I like it. I mean, that's why I said it's more rational here. It's like this is more like the way people should behave, And like if someone has to get in, if someone's merging into your lane, you create space for them and let them come in. Whereas in Miami, you would never allow anybody to merge into your lane. They can go behind you.
Uh-huh. When you say it's more rational here, would you then characterize Miami as less rational or irrational?
Yeah, I mean it's probably irrational.
Okay.
Probably, yeah.
So a caffeine/cocaine fueled aggressive irrationality.
Yeah, something like that.
So then the question I have is, did you butt heads against this? Was this like a kind of culture where you were just like, I can't wait to get out of here. This is driving me nuts. Or was it like, did you like flow with the vibe everyone says now.
I mean, it took me a while to get used to living here, and I wasn't really even aware. Like when I got to San Francisco and I was driving, I was like, what's wrong? Something's wrong. It doesn't feel right. I'm out of step somehow. And it was because I didn't realize how aggressive things are. And, I was always kind of like lurching and then realizing like, oh, I don't need to do what I'm doing. It took me it took me a while to figure out that I was coming from a place to where people were just really aggressive, because it just somehow, I mean, that was how I grew up, and that was how you interacted with people. So it took a while.
Uh-huh.
I was just thinking about coming back to Miami, and I was like at Christmas, and I was just doing the most basic thing, where you pull up next to a space, and then you're gonna parallel park, reverse back into the space. In San Francisco, everybody understands what that is, and any neighborhood in the city, no problem. They create space for you. And this woman, like Miami, first we'd been there for like 15 minutes, and I was just parking to go into some store. And the second I start to go back, she just comes right up on me and like refuses to move. Like, and it's like I couldn't even process it. What are you doing?
Uh-huh.
So, I just put it in reverse and just like, well, she'll figure it out, or I'll hit her. But which I guess is more of a Miami type thing. Anyway, we gave each other the finger, and then it was over. But
Okay, so then that doesn't cause you anxiety. So, like the kind of like aggressive, let's just call it the kind of aggression. We'll turn into a noun that is existing there. Like that causes me anxiety here. I just dropped my wife off somewhere, and came back here, and it like Los Angeles is full of drivers like that, and it's just like every moment is like I want to rip the steering wheel off of the steering column and like smash things, and I've had to learn how to somehow get that anger out somewhere else. Like but it seems like you were just like, yeah, I gave her the finger. It was fine. Like you didn't carry that anger. Like that anger is still in me right now. The rest of your life isn't affected by that anger, I guess is what I'm asking.
I guess this is also reminding me of another story of driving in Miami. Like we were there, we came back, we had the kids with us, and my wife was actually driving, and somebody cut us off, or somebody did something, and my wife and I both burst into like this tirade of like profanity, and like the kids had never seen that because that wouldn't have happened in San Francisco, and maybe we wouldn't have reacted like that in San Francisco, but it felt really good to like get back in that groove of like just unleashing a hostility on other drivers. So that was it made me laugh at the time, and it's still kind of funny to think about.
Yeah, I like that's the way I drive. It's just like get the anger out in that moment, and then my wife was like, because she's from New York, so she's not used to like being in a car. Really, I mean, obviously
Right.
she's been in cars. It's not like it's such a foreign thing to her, but like that kind of like aggressiveness and that hostility, like you like swear and you like yell at them, and then it gets out. And she's like, you're making these car rides really unpleasant when you do that. And I'm just like, oh, okay. Okay. So I'll keep it. I'll figure out some other way to get the anger out. But
Yeah.
But that anger never. I guess what I'm trying to figure out is like, because I'm trying to go from this like macro cultural perspective of Miami in the 60s and 70s into the 80s down to like the micro, like your emotional life, and what like possibilities did this kind of culture allow for young Bill to like? What kind of pathways did it carve out for you? Or is it just a backdrop and I'm placing too much emphasis on this stuff?
I think it's just a backdrop, really. It's like, I mean, obviously it impacted who I was, and I absorbed it, but it's, I don't think it, I mean, if we're going to ultimately talk about music, I mean, we could talk about that, because there's probably some connection there. But yeah, there was no. I don't think there's anything about like Miami in the '80s that like impacts, you know, in a kind of identifiable way my personality.
Well, I think there is this kind of connection, and it's not a. I wouldn't call it a cause and effect kind of thing. I would just call it a like a background, like cosmic microwave background radiation kind of thing. It's just there, this ambient kind of feeling, and either you flow with it or you don't flow with it, or like you partly flow, whatever. Like I grew up in Pennsylvania, and it was a very repressed kind of atmosphere. And
Oh,
so I think that along with other kinds of like familial things, my parents, like I'm sure generational trauma, like my grandfather fought in World War II, and I can list like a bunch of things, but like I'm sure that PTSD filtered into my dad to
hmm.
make repression and that kind of stuff. And I think it led to a general repression that kind of like pushed me in a certain direction, and eventually I got out from under it. But like that's why I said like I think there's some, for most people unless you're just like very resistant to whatever's going on around you, which you could be. You could have been a kind of person who was just like I'm me, and whatever, fuck what's going on outside of me. It's not gonna I'm more impervious. That's, I guess, the word I was looking for. I'm more impervious to whatever's going on around me, and I'm just gonna do what I want to do.
I mean, if this is I would probably focus on like someone's parents more than like the city that they grew up in, because you could grow up in Pennsylvania and depending on whether how your parents were, you could have, wildly different experiences. Same in Miami. I wasn't raised with much of a religious upbringing at all. And I don't remember, a lot of like things that I would discuss as repression. But on the other hand, I mean, I was born in '62, corporal punishment was very much still a thing, So like my wife was never got spanked, but the three kids in our family definitely were getting it. So
Mhm.
stuff like that probably is more meaningful than like what was happening on the other side of the city.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it all, like, I mean, again, going from this like macroscopic perspective down to I think that is probably, you're probably right. It's like your family or your friends are going to be
Right.
like where your personality is mostly formed.
Yeah.
I mean, what were your parents like when you were growing up?
They were, I mean, now it's much easier for me to kind of see, and now that I'm a parent myself, I certainly have a lot more, empathy for them, and then they strike me now as kind of amazing, because they didn't go to college. My mom was still a teenager when they got married and had me when she had just turned 20. And they were just like we're done, they went to school and they were just like, we're done being children, we're
Hmm.
getting married, we're going to have kids, and our lives begin now. And they had then, and now they just have so much more energy than I've ever I've ever had in my life. Like they're constantly doing stuff, and they're constantly on the move, and they're like in their 80s, and they do stuff. They go out and do things every day, you know. Whereas my wife and I are like exhausted at the end of the day, and we're like, maybe if we can watch a movie, that's like something.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep. I feel you. Yeah,
yeah,
I'm the same way. So, like, were they that energetic when you were younger?
yeah. We were always we took we would take giant like 6-week trips around the U.S. in the car for vacation, And, we had a boat and we were going water skiing every weekend. And we lived on a lake and we also had boats on the lake. And we were doing a lot of like stuff and we were doing sports, I mean, I wasn't really like a sports guy, but I didn't really have a lot of, that was just the way I was raised. It was like, so I played basketball and I played football and, you know, until I got old enough to the point where it was like, it was clear that I had no business being on a football field. But
Was
yeah.
that was that like a real choice you made? Like another thing I'm curious about on the show is like when do you start making actual like choices for yourself about what you want to, not only just like what you want to do, but like who you want to be?
I mean, I was always, I was kind of a weirdo. So it was like, I mean, and my parents got that, I think, right away that I was like a creative person. And I painted, every day. When I got home from school, I had like, you know, and my dad had built a dark room in the garage. So we had a dark room to, you know, take pictures and print pictures, develop film. So I mean, I was always doing like creative stuff, and any time I showed any interest in things, like my parents were very encouraging, and in terms of being like, oh, this is what you want to do, okay, sure, we can facilitate this.
What did they do for a living then?
My dad was an electrician who like started his own company, and then ultimately wound up working for one of his clients, and then like worked there for like 30 or 40 years. And then my mom worked in financial aid and worked at like University of Miami and some other places.
Did they have any specific ambitions for themselves?
I think that was it. It was just like they were like, we're gonna have a family and we want to just do, and do stuff and have fun. But I mean, they weren't like they didn't have, I mean, I don't know, like if that connects to the word ambition or not. I mean, that was it. They were just like all about their family and their kids and having a good time.
Yeah, I think so. Like I think about my parents a lot, and I know that having a family was really important to them in a way that like it is not to my wife and I, and it may just be a generational thing at this point. Where it's just like, well, I don't know if we have the money to have a family, even if we actually wanted one.
Right.
But like, I know I'm always curious about the kind of like what do you see like your parents wanting, and does that affect what you want out of life?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really think about it in those terms, and I didn't have like, I mean, so I painted every day, and when it came time for me to go to college, I was like, art school seems to make the most sense because this is what I'm doing. And my parents, I would have been I was the first person to go to college in the family. And my parents were like, you should really do something more practical. You don't want to waste this opportunity on art. And so I wound up going, my compromise position was architecture. But it was actually, it's funny now that I'm thinking about it. I think my first compromise position was interior design, and my mom was like just horrified that I would like consider going. She's like, no, not interior design. You know nothing about fabric. So anyway, I guess architecture seemed more manly, but I went into the architecture program, and I, like after a year, it was clear that like I had no business going into architecture because it was, it involved drawing, but it was not art in the way that I was thinking about it. And so I liked reading. So I just became an English major. And so like after 4 years, I got a degree in English and then went and got a master's. But I mean, in terms of making choices, I didn't really make a choice. I made a choice. I didn't get what I wanted. And so I wound up like just trying to sort of make other people happy, which, I've thought about many times, like, should I have, just but it was, it was what it was. So I haven't really, I don't know how my life would have wound up had I gone to art school. Maybe it's much better that I didn't go to art school.
Well, that was my story too. I think it's a story of a lot of people who, I don't know what your economic background is, but if you don't come from money, there's a lot of like, well, I don't have a safety net, so, and I do want to please these people who are in my life, so you're kind of trying to negotiate between all these different desires, between your own desires, these other people's desires, and kind of like economic circumstances. And so you're like, and trying to triangulate among that is difficult.
Yeah. There was no question. Like, my parents made it very clear to me early on. They were like, we're planning on spending all of the money. So there will be no money left over for you when we die. So figure it out.
So they really do, like, we're having a good time. We're here. They really had this
that was their experience, right? Their parents gave them no money and they felt like they were doing fine. And so it was possible to do this, and, and it's worked out. But so in terms of negotiating, the money side of it, I really just I didn't have the level of independence, I think, to just tell my parents, well, thank you for your input, but, it's my life and I'm going to do this the way I want it, but, it was okay being an English major. It was actually kind of fun.
Yeah,
I liked it.
Yeah. I did philosophy, and I was like, because I was trying to triangulate, I really didn't know what I wasn't self-aware enough. I wasn't like, I didn't interrogate, my own feelings. I was pretty like closed off at that point. And so there was definitely this kind of like, well, this is I think I want to do something creative without knowing it. I just had a vague, inchoate feeling. And my parents want me to be like, classic, like, I guess they're second generation. So like I was the generation that was going to, they were the first to go to college. I was going to be like something more. And so I'm trying to like figure out like square the circle with all those things. And then you just get this kind of like, I don't know, I can be a professor, and I'm not happy doing it that much, but I like philosophy enough, but it's not really what I want to do. But
yeah,
it's this kind of like half measures, this in between life that doesn't feel right. And I don't know if like that's the same kind of feeling you had. And if so, like, when do you think you kind of like dug out from under it to like start making those choices for yourself?
Well, what happened ultimately was, so I got a master's degree, but by the time I got the degree, it was clear that there was really no point to carry on and do a PhD. And I could see, the bodies littered around me of people who had gone on to do PhDs, but like never finished their dissertations. And, and I was just like, no, I guess at that point I knew enough to know I wasn't going to do that. And I carried on like as an adjunct for, I don't know, maybe a year or two after that. And I eventually got to the point where I just couldn't even be an adjunct anymore, because it was just, I felt like the beginning of every semester, I would just be like, the kids would all kind of like look the same to me. And I would feel like I had seen them before. They were taking my class again somehow. So, and I kind of just stopped. And I had a friend who, like, my roommate, I had a company and I started working for him because I could just work a few days a week and make enough money to live. And I think that's really the point where I became like, fully human. Where, because I had been kind of like hiding, because like people will be, well, what do you do? Well, I'm in graduate school or whatever, and it was just kind of a way to hide from like taking any responsibility, because I could pretend like I had this career path when in fact I didn't really have it. And then once I was out, then I was like, all right, well, now I actually have to, do something. And so that's when I started doing things. And so I
Okay.
was probably like 25 at that point.
Do you know how like the rest of your life changed? I want to talk about the creative stuff in a moment, but
Okay.
I'm really curious, like making that decision, being like, I'm gonna. I mean, it is really classically existentialist, right? I'm gonna take responsibility for myself now, and you're making
Yep.
this actual choice, right? How did that like change your life in general beyond the creative?
Um, I don't think it changed it. The funny thing is I don't think it really changed it at all, except now the creative stuff became important, because that's all I had was the creative work I was doing. Um, but every other aspect of my life kind of stayed the same. But now suddenly I was like motivated. I mean, I just like suddenly felt a responsibility to my own ideas or whatever, to make them. Whereas I think before it was all kind of really vague. Um, but yeah, I don't think anything else changed. It was just like, except now I had a responsibility to make some stuff, to justify my existence now that I didn't have this pain. Because when you're in when you're in school, you're like, oh, yeah, I'm working on my master's or whatever, and it sounds like you're doing something. Um, but once you don't have that, then you really have to come up with something else. So I think that was the change.
Ooh, when I left grad school, I was bereft. It was a low moment of just like, so who am I? It was like really tied in with my identity because I had never made that decision before. And I really like, I don't think anyone else has ever described in this kind of like almost Sartrean terms of just like, yeah, responsibility, almost like a duty in some sense to make these ideas something. And I never had taken on that responsibility before because I think I was scared of responsibility. I still am in some way. I still like, it really does take me a while to like wrap my head around an idea because I'm scared of fucking it up in some way.
Yeah. I mean, it was a major transition for me as well. And I, actually like reading biographies wound up giving me like was a bit of a I don't know, the word solace keeps coming into my head, so I'll just go with it. But there, yeah, I was reading, and just made me feel better to read about other people's lives, and to be like, oh, somehow I could feel like it was okay, like other people have been here, and I'm just a person trying to do my thing, and it's okay. But yeah, no, it was a low point for me for sure when I left school.
So then what were the steps you started to take in order to, let's say, honor that responsibility?
I just started making things, and I was making films, and I got some grants, and you know, things started to come together, and eventually it turned into a job. Some 3-4 years down the line, and I did that job, for 7 years until I wound up moving out here,
Mm-hmm.
so that I could actually make real money and have health insurance and stuff.
Right. Were there specific filmmakers that you were looking up to or that were inspiring you at the time?
Well, I mean, they're the filmmakers that I love. I mean, Godard just died. I mean, he's always been probably like my number one. Uh, I don't. My films are nothing like Godard, but I mean, that was, as an artist, he's still like my number one uh, person.
Yeah. How about music? Like, when does that start becoming something for you?
Well, I mean, I was always into, kind of not always into music, but like when I was a teenager, my parents inexplicably bought me a turntable. Like there was no music in the house at all. I was the oldest kid, so I didn't have an older sibling like showing me what music was. And just like out of nowhere, when I was about 15, my parents bought a turntable for me, a stereo, and then I just discovered music. I was like, oh, there's music. and like I like to read, so I would like read reviews and just buy like the records that were getting good reviews in 1977. So I was hearing a lot of like punk rock and stuff like that. And I made some friends at school, connecting with other people who, there weren't a lot of people. There may be two people in my high school who were into the Ramones, but yeah, I was one of them.
Like, when you started to let's say make this creative turn, I don't know,
Yeah.
that's a bad way of phrasing it, but you know what I mean. Like, was there a particular ambition that you had when you were younger that kind of got buried under like, well, I want to please my parents and I kind of want to triangulate between everyone's desires that came out again, or did you like not have any kind of real ambition and then you had to like form one?
I mean, ambition, it was always, ambition. I don't know if this is the right word. I mean, I just always had this compulsion to make things. And when I was in high school, maybe it was painting, but it didn't really matter. And still kind of doesn't matter what the thing is that I'm making. So right now it's music and records and what have you. But, it's just, I need a place to put my brain, um, you know, when I'm not being directly engaged by something. Like, I have to have a resting place for my brain, and the resting place is always thinking about whatever it is I'm working on.
Uh
Um,
huh.
so, and that's very important. I've come to learn that that's like really important, and if I don't have that, then that's not a good place for me to be. So yeah, so I mean, so in terms of like film, and I mean, I don't know if I had an ambition to make movies. I couldn't, and I even wanted to make a feature, but I don't think I had the wherewithal at that age to figure out how to get there. I had some friends. I didn't have enough friends, I think, to make the kind of low budget feature I wanted to make. And I think I was like probably too ambitious in my scope. Um, but yeah, but I mean, I was also in bands at the same time, and I had projects to work on and to keep busy. And I mean, I would have been like I had a band, so it would have been great to have made a record back then and make it, maybe go on tour or something. But all of that, there was no. In Miami was, it's at the end of a peninsula, so it's like you don't get a lot of bands that would come down that far. Touring bands typically didn't do it unless they were like really big acts. And people and the other side of it was that people who lived there weren't really getting out, So there wasn't a lot of like, it wasn't like you had an active scene where there were lots of examples of how people were being successful playing music in Miami. Anybody who was ambitious in the sense I think you're using it, like just got the hell out of the city. And you know what I mean? You wouldn't, if you were ambitious, you would not have been in Miami, at age 25. You would have moved to New York, but I didn't. So
Yeah, I almost don't even mean like necessarily like, well, we want to be whatever the Talking Heads. I don't know, like whatever was like the thing that people would want to be in the like early '80s or late '70s or something like that. I just mean like I want this for me. Now that I've made this decision in my life,
mhm.
I want X, Y, or Z for myself. This is the thing that I like. Like I would love to. I know personally for my own ambition, like I'm writing a pilot right now. Like we just sold a TV show, and I'm like, I want to actually make this. Like it's been nice. Like I made a nice little living selling these things, but they never get made. I would like there to be a thing that gets made at this point
Mhm.
for me, and that's like a person, like more like a personal goal, and less than like it matters to anyone else or that it matters in the scheme of things
Yeah.
necessarily.
I'm trying to think if I had specific goals. Like I'm sure I did have like specific goals. Um, but once I started playing in a band that was making records and touring, which happened like in the 90s, then like it was much more like, yeah, like having very specific things like, but when you haven't even really got the route, you know, before we got to that stage, it's much more, just about doing stuff, and being specific, like, oh, you could finish the set or whatever. You would work on something and be like, oh, we've got, 20 minutes worth of music now, or, it was no real specific thing to achieve, you know, play the show or whatever.
Yeah, I guess that's what I was trying to figure out is were you just kind of like buffeted about creatively for a while? Or did you like was there a like no, we're going to have 30 minutes of music so we can put out this our album or whatever.
No, I mean, yeah, I mean, I was always like the taskmaster, and I was always the guy who was like, here, let's do this now and let's do this. And so I was specific, and we were working on things and things got made, but it was like, in terms of like being able to translate that into something that would like escape the gravitational pull of Miami, there was like, I didn't really have, I couldn't figure out at that point how to do that yet. So it was kind of, I was working and it was stuff, but it was also kind of like in a bit of a bubble, I mean, I got a couple, I got some grants, and I was doing things that were getting me outside of just the local folks, but I don't know. It wasn't really until I got the band, and then there was like a clear sense of like there's an audience, that it kind of started to click. Because when you're kind of just doing it for yourself and your friends, it's great, but it doesn't quite feel real. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
Do you remember like a moment? Maybe it wasn't a moment, but like if there was like when it did click for you, when you're like, okay, so this is not just like something insular happening for me. There is a connection to something outside of me or outside of Miami.
Yeah, I mean, like being in the band and being able to make records and tour, and the label that was putting our stuff out was in Philadelphia, so we would go up to Philadelphia a lot, and then but also like tour the country, and and that felt, and people, we would go places and people knew who we were, and our video got played on MTV, and it felt like we were actually like doing something that felt somehow more more out there, more real than just playing shows for our friends. And also, I mean, I think creatively it was like, we kind of got rewarded for pushing it in unacceptable ways.
How so?
That was just really, I mean, that actually, now that I think about it, it's like that was kind of like the satisfying thing, was the fact that like I think most people, a lot of people, like a lot of the people who played in bands in Miami, like were just trying to be, they wanted people to like them, and they wanted to do the right thing, and they wanted to fit in. And then we just kind of, Adris and I, were just like, just went the opposite way. We were just like, well, what can we do that's going to be really upsetting? and like we got rewarded for that, and that was a good feeling.
Do you think that's a reaction to the kind of like banal, that's my word, or like benignness of the rest of the scene there? Or do you think that's coming out of like, I don't know if you can answer this or not, but like coming out of like, once you start taking responsibility for yourself, you're like, oh, now this is the actual expression that I feel is flowing from inside of me. And I just want to like, we're going to push the boundaries and see what the fuck we can do.
It was a lot of things, right? Part of it was just like the George Costanza, like what I'm doing is not working, so I'm going to do the absolute opposite of whatever my instincts are. Part of it is what you're saying is like everybody else is just so, kind of pathetic. that let's just show them how much contempt we have for them. Part of it was that like I definitely had the feeling like right, the genie that gets let out of the bottle too late, and instead of like granting wishes is just like filled with fury. And I was definitely kind of like, I hadn't even known that feeling was in there, and then suddenly like I just had all this anger just pouring out of me, and I don't even know like where it was coming from. And that got channeled into the music for sure. But yeah, so it was a lot of different things, but it was very satisfying to like, you know, to go in that direction and then like have people like it, you know.
Yeah.
So.
Do you think there's a through line at all between that and the music you're making now?
Yeah, I don't think. I mean, I don't think what I'm making now is as raw emotionally as like what I was making probably like, you know, in in the early 90s, because it was also like it was this interesting thing of like I had been playing, like kind of like almost people have described it as like math rock, like being very like structured and just kind of very detailed music. And then I started playing with Adris, who never played drums before. She was just an interesting person. And I was like, I just want to play music with her, and then I'll invent something that complements what she is going to do. We don't know what that is yet, but I want to improvise with that. I don't want to improvise with somebody who's can only play in some strange time signature. Um, God bless you, Tim, if you're listening to this. But so that was the path I was going. Like again, that was so the initial decision was to do something bad, like you shouldn't be playing, with somebody who can't play. But that was the path I chose, and then that kind of set everything in motion. That I've forgotten now what the question was.
I was
But
wondering if there was a through line, but in my mind, maybe it feels like there's like a through line of like freedom.
yeah, I mean, I think that's what it was. I think it was just like I was like, all right, I'm going to play with Adris, and we're going to figure out something that we can do together, and we're going to rehearse. We wound up, I was working at this, or I should probably say I had access to a movie theater. Um, and so, like every night after the last show, we'd go over there, drums and, everything was already set up. We just plug in and play for a couple of hours. But yeah, it was. It was a great adventure. And so you're saying, how does that connect with what I'm doing now? What I'm doing now, I mean, so that was the point of like taking this detailed music and cracking it open, and playing with Adris forced me to figure stuff out in a way that I'm still figuring things out, but it's like it's no longer that's not where I am in the timeline, It's like I've already cracked the spine of that of music, and I'm more now, finessing the details and working on other things. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this might be the most, like I said before, classically existentialist conversation I've had on the show, because it really is like, I'm going to take responsibility for myself. And with having that responsibility for myself, I'm get ultimate freedom now. And now I'm going to like go off in that direction to do what I want to do and figure out how to be as free as possible within this medium.
Yeah. I guess. Yeah. I like that. That sounds good. Yeah. No, it was incredibly, no, it was so exciting and fun at that stage to make up things. I mean, it's still very fun and exciting, but that at that point, not knowing where it was going to lead was really exciting. It was good. It was like creatively just very satisfying to work on, and frustrating at times, but it's good.
Yeah, but like good frustrating.
Bad frustrating also. At some point we kind of like, I was trying to figure out how to take the chaos and kind of like organize it, and that took me a while to figure out. So I don't know if that was good frustrating or bad frustrating, but it took me a while, to try and figure out how to do that.
Yeah. I guess like when I said that, what I meant was like, the most frustrating times that I have trying to figure out, like, say, a script or a narrative or something like that, that frustration at the end of the day pales in comparison with, like, the frustration I felt working at NYU and just being at the very beginning of after leaving grad school and, like, not knowing what to do with my life and, like, not having any money and being like, well, I got to sell my guitar this month if I want to make rent, and that kind of white knuckle frustration. Yeah. The creative frustration I will take any day, whereas the other one is just praying it's past.
Yeah. No, it was. Yeah, I agree with you. It wasn't that kind of frustration.
Last question then.
Okay.
If we're dividing your life into these two halves, which is very arbitrary.
Okay.
Could you see, like, your future? Could you just see, like, a straight shot, like, oh, I know what I'm going to do and I know how this is going to be and it's going to be, and this is kind of banal and boring, or were you like, was it not that apparent to you before you kind of just, like, you know, decided not to get your PhD?
When could I see it or not see it?
I guess I'm dividing your life into, like, making this decision for
yourself. That's fine. I got that part. So at what point am I peering into the future? And
so before that, were you just kind of like, you know, one foot in front of the other, or could you just see the future, just the straight shot? I asked, I'm projecting my own pass on you because I saw a straight shot into the grave and it really freaked me out.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I think before leaving grad school, I don't think I had a clear, I mean, I knew that I wanted to do something, you know, and I knew that I was creative. And I mean, you know, if you're painting every day, maybe you imagine that people will buy your paintings and then will become a painter. But I did, you know, there was no, you know, I knew no painters. So it was impossible to even imagine, you know, and especially like in a kind of like internet world, you weren't connected, you know, in the same way that we are now. So I didn't really see much of a path at all. After I left, you know, some stuff actually started to happen. And then I was like, I didn't really see a path, but I could see that I was making some kind of progress, you know, and I was seeing, whether in film or in music, I felt like I was getting some kind of recognition. And you know, that was, it still doesn't feel like I straight shot, certainly. But at least, you know, you feel like there's some kind of incremental development happening, you know, and you're just not in the same place.
That's great. Bill, thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you. What a fun conversation.
This was an absolute delight. So thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we'll see you next time. Bye. Bye, oh, 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 bye.